see. Okay, I think we are streaming. Does everyone see the notes? Let's cut. Right. Very good. Yep, it looks like we are good to go. Welcome back. This is number 12. This is session number 12, and it is covering oh, sorry, let's go look. It's covering.
It's covering the last chapter of the Persian Bayan.
Gotcha. Okay. And
Right.
that is pages 490 to 522. So 32 pages. Very good. All right. The floor is yours, Peter.
That isn't it funny that we continue to use terms that were sort of appropriate back in the 17th century or something, you know, because that actually meant literally what that were those words back in that time, because it meant that you could come up and stand in front of everybody on the floor. And so we have a shorter chapter here. The last chapter is shorter. And I think you're aware of this because many, if not all of you, have read this chapter. So you know that he stopped abruptly at the 10th Báb, which has, of course, encouraged all sorts of speculations. But it was never explained by the Báb, and as far as I know, it wasn't explained by Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, or Shoghi Effendi. So I think it's just going to be a mystery until maybe somebody will, in the next world, maybe you'll remember to ask that question. Although I have a feeling that probably there will be lots of other questions that will take precedence. So one thing we do know, and I have not yet figured out how we know it, but I promise you that by next week I will find out. And that is, how do we know that him whom God shall make manifest was intended by the Báb to complete the Persian Bayan? That I don't know. I don't know if there was some special tablet that he addressed to him whom God shall make manifest, or whether it was in the text of some other tablet that he wrote. But I'm going to do my best to find out, because it's certainly well known to people who are interested in the study of the faith, the writings of the faith, and the history of the faith, that this was the case. So we'll find out. Okay. And so again, if there's anybody who has any pressing questions or statements, anything that happened to you, that realizations you came to in the past week or during the hiatus of a couple of weeks that we had, if anybody would like to start off with something before we start reading, please do. I'm happy to cede the floor to you.
Peter, are you saying that we do not know where in the writings the Báb said that him whom God shall make manifest will finish the Vahed 9? I just assumed, huh?
No, I didn't say we. I said I. I don't know.
I don't know either. I just assumed it was Baha'i fact that was the reason why he stopped. But you're saying there isn't a readily available tablet about that, huh?
No, I simply don't know. That's the thing, is that I've heard about it. You know, there are a lot of things that you hear about as a Baha'i over the years. You hear them in firesides. You hear them in conversations. You hear that, well, the Guardian said, or Abdul Baha said, or he wrote, and then but people are notoriously forgetful of exact references. You know, there are not many people who have either the the bent of mind to do that, and also we tend in our sort of casual conversations with each other not to be too stringent about that. When someone says something that sounds unfamiliar to me, I don't immediately say, well, where did you get that nutty idea? I might think it, but I won't say it. And so usually what I do is if I hear something unfamiliar to me, is that I go and do my own research and try to figure out where it comes from. And I just a humorous anecdote on that, which is that I have a dear friend who's a professional archivist, and he worked at the World Center for, I think, 13 years as their chief archivist of papers related to the faith in English. And he was there about the same time that Bill Collins was building the Baha'i Library and creating really a terrific library. Bill had worked for the Library of Congress, and then when he retired from the World Center, he went back to the Library of Congress. These guys had terrific training. His name is David Pitts, and David was an archivist for the federal government, worked on documents, federal documents. And when he came back from Haifa, he also continued to work for the federal government, and here in California. And he became intrigued with the stories that people told that they didn't have any references for. So he started writing them down. Of course, he was in the World Center for like 13 years. So, I mean, I had plenty of opportunity to hear people tell stories, right? So he wrote this enormous book over the years. And then the University of Denmark agreed to give him a PhD for editing and publishing it, which he did. And the book's available. It's called Baha'i Lore, Lore. And it's great reading because you might actually recognize some of the things that people have said to you in firesides or at conferences, or in various casual, more relaxed circumstances where nobody would ask them, where did you get that idea? And what he found was that there were a whole lot of ideas that nobody seems to find in the writings, and nobody seems to find in any other reliable source, like, for example, some answered questions. In any case, I have heard from various people that the Persian Bayan was completed by Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Iqan, but I don't know the exact reference. So I'll have it to you by next week, and who knows, maybe somebody else will look for it too and also find it.
Yeah, Peter, my understanding is it's the Aqdas, and then the will and testament of Abdul-Baha then continues all of this. So the Aqdas is the completion of the incomplete work.
Well, you see, that's interesting. I can look into that too, but I don't think you have a specific reference to that. And I certainly don't have a specific reference for that either. And that's where what we have to resolve is these questions where somebody has told us something, or maybe even somebody told us something and we misunderstood it. Like, for example, Mr. Dunbar has personally told me that the Kitab-i-Iqan was a continuation of Persian Bayan. But at the time that he told me, I never asked him, where did you get that? What's your reference? So we'll look and we'll find it out. So in Vahid 9, we have we have a number of teachings which are reiterations of what we've seen before, but there are also some new things. We know that, for example, the first point here on Báb 1 of Vahid 9, the Báb, this Báb, that is this chapter, designates certain sacred places as belonging to God. They're the property of God, and therefore they must be returned to him whom God shall make manifest. Everything belongs to the manifestation of God when he's on earth. And it's an interesting fact that the manifestation always says, I don't want it. I don't want to possess it, because the previous manifestation said it belongs to him. And so you have this, actually really important idea in Bábí Bahá'í theology, that the manifestation has the right to own everything, and that he chooses not to, because that's not his job. That's not what he's come for, not to own things. And then we have, then the second point was that if a Bábí prays in the home of someone who is an unbeliever, he has blessed that dwelling. That dwelling has been blessed by the very act. And we're reminded of that short prayer that's in the beginning of many Baha'i prayer books. Blessed is the spot and the place, and so forth. The third point is this reserving of places for at all meetings for 19 persons. So this is very similar to the Jewish practice of reserving a place at the Passover Seder and also at the Shabbat table, at the Sabbath table, for Elijah. You want to make sure that if he comes, we've got a place for him. And the Báb is reserving 19 people, because it would be for him whom God shall make manifest and his 18 letters of the living. And then, as we see, the point number 4 is designating the Shiraz as a place of pilgrimage. And this is a very common gesture that we see in religion, because not only did he reserve Shiraz for special pilgrimages, but Baha'u'llah reserved Tehran for special pilgrimage. And if we go backwards, we find that Mecca which is where Muhammad was born, is reserved as a place of pilgrimage for Muslims. And we can keep going back. I mean, Christians have always regarded Jerusalem as being the center of their religion. And Jesus was born just next door in Bethlehem, and it is right next door. It's like a suburb. We see in Báb number 2 is there's the requirement that Bábís are going to teach their children to write beautifully, and in the script of the language that was current in Iran at the time, which is actually 2 languages, Persian and Arabic. We see that teaching reiterated by Baha'u'llah, where he says it's the responsibility of parents to educate their children. And only if they're unable to do so or can't afford to do so, then that responsibility passes to the House of Justice. But it is originally the parents' responsibility. Then he reiterates the fact that the verses of the new manifestation are going to replace those of the previous manifestation as the ultimate authority for making any kind of a decision. Then in point 6, he's reiterating how important is the role of the scribe who has beautiful handwriting. We've seen this theme covered many times before. And here specifically saying that that every Bábí scribe is to prepare the writings of the Báb in perfect handwriting so that they may be passed on to him whom God shall make manifest. This is a kind of an interesting point on 7, is that he says that there are 19 varieties of this Arabic Persian script that are permitted in the Bábí dispensation. I've never seen any kind of research into what those 19 varieties are, but he does clarify that the number 1, the most perfect, is Shikaste. And Shikaste is that script that when we see writings of the Báb, and for that matter, many of those of Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah, they're written in Shikaste. Let's see now, and you know, when you have calligraphic writings, like for those of Mishkan Kalam, for example, who's probably the most famous calligrapher in the faith, in the history of the faith. Mishkan Kalam could write in any script, and many of his are in different scripts, not just in Shikaste, but his Shikaste was, of course, really phenomenal. Let's look at Báb 3. So, excuse me. This is very interesting. That he says that everybody, all human beings must be silent in the day of judgment. And as we know, when we encounter this sort of a teaching of a manifestation, we really have to think deeply about what is he talking about here, because the literal meaning of, you know, when the manifestation is around, nobody's allowed to speak is actually contradicted by a number of other statements where they're told that they can ask questions of the manifestation. Well, obviously you can't ask questions if you're not allowed to speak, but it's making a point, and the point is that nobody can compare the words of the manifestation in that day to anything else that is being said or written by any human being, because it's the word of God, and it's the unique word of God. Let's look at 9.
Peter, so I
Yes.
found the resource. So in God Passes By, it's written that it was written, the Kitab Iran, it was written in fulfillment of the prophecy of the Báb, who has specifically stated that the promised one would complete the text of the unfinished Persian Bayan. And in reply to the questions addressed to Baha'u'llah by the as yet unconverted maternal uncle of the Báb, Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad, while on a visit with his brother, Haji Mirza Hassan Ali, to Karbala. So the exposition of this is explained again in God Passes By in that paragraph that I was reading from.
Yeah. Yes. And as the Guardian many times pointed out, he never affirms anything as a Guardian unless he's read it or heard it from Abdul Baha or Baha'u'llah. And so there probably, you know, there must be some reference in the writings of the Báb where he actually appoints him whom God shall make manifest. That I don't know about. I had forgotten that the Guardian had mentioned this. Thank you for bringing this up, because it makes it clear that it is Kitab-i-Igan, that is the completion. And it also makes it clear that this was ordered by the Báb and then fulfilled by Baha'u'llah.
And then my confusion about the Aqdas, it's that the last will and testament of Abdul Baha clarifies the institutions that were foreshadowed by the Aqdas, such as the international institutions we now know today in the Baha'i administrative order. So that was the confusion, because there's the completion with Baha'u'llah and the Aqdas with Abdul Baha's last will and testament. And that was, I confused the two.
Yes, we had a similar pattern of one completing the other. 9 is mostly concerning with the role of a monarch in the time of him whom God shall make manifest, which is to protect and make as comfortable as possible the life of the new manifestation when he appears. And then he goes on in 10 to say that this is also incumbent upon the leaders of religion. In other words, the letters of the living, or in some cases they were called the mirrors in the Bábí writings, that those who were looking after the spiritual well-being of the Bábís, it's again their responsibility to make the life of the promised one, of him whom God shall make manifest, as comfortable as possible, and to protect him from attacks. And these are all very, very important things to understand in the context of Baha'i history, so that next time you go, after you read this and you go back and you read Dawnbreakers or you read God Passes By, and you are reminded of the implacable opposition of some of the Bábís, including and ultimately led by Baha'u'llah's half-brother and his sidekick, Sayyid Muhammad Isfahani, is that the most implacable opposition to him whom God shall make manifest did not come from Muslims. It doesn't come from Christians. They come from Jews. It didn't come from anybody but the Bábís. And the Bábís really tried to kill him. They tried to eliminate him. And the Báb, of course, we know that the Báb had prescience. He knew what was going to happen in the future. Manifestations have this gift from God. And so he's warning people without giving away too much information. You need to take care of him. That's your responsibility. And I think 11 is also important for us to look at, because here it is talking about that in the time of the coming of every single manifestation, there are some people who are veiled or inhibited by their own passions, by their own consciousness, from recognizing the truth of the verses that are revealed by that new manifestation. It's not only has been, it will be. And Baha'u'llah, as you may know, Baha'u'llah said that I do not bewail my own fate. I bewail the fate of him who will come after me. And this has been clarified by the Guardian, saying this is emphatically referring to the next manifestation of God and not to Abdu'l-Baha. Let's go on to 4.
Peter, real quick.
Yeah.
Where can we find that reference that you just spoke of?
Which one?
The what you just said in regards to Baha'u'llah and the mention of the next manifestation. Where do you know where we can find that reference at?
Oh, you mean
I-
I'm supposed to have an encyclopedic
No,
memory?
no. I just, if you have it off the top of your head, that's fine. If not, this is a note in the video and I'll go back and look for it myself.
Baha on successor. I'll look for it this week. Okay. I'll find it. I'm sure I can find it. I just read it like, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks ago. But I just don't remember exactly which tablets it is in.
I appreciate it because it's interesting. The presentation or the thing that we had yesterday, it came up in conversation. That's all.
Really?
So thank you.
Okay,
right.
sure. We'll find it. We'll find it.
Thanks.
And we'll find also the Guardian's explanation that this does not refer to Abdul Baha. He was that I know where that is. That's in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. And it may be that the tablet where Baha'u'llah talks about the sufferings of his successor, that's also cited in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. So you can look there first. I think that the takeaway from the next with 15, which is really quite long, is actually quite simple. It's summarized in the very end, which is, if you make mention of God with joy and happiness, it is worth more than 1,000 utterances made without joy and happiness. And this is something that Baha'u'llah reaffirmed in the Kitab-i Aqdas, where he said that it is not the reading or reciting of many verses that is pleasing to God. That what is pleasing to God is that whatever we recite with love, with joy, with emotional investment, okay? And his wording is very emphatic. I'll find that particular Kitab-i Aqdas on the length of prayers and recitations. I'll definitely get that so that I can pass that along to all of you as well. Let's move on to 5. You know, one of the things that is kind of a blessing for those who encountered the Báb during his lifetime was that they could appreciate to a much greater degree than we can the power of the revelation of God, the power of the words in their original. And even for many modern readers, be they people who have studied the languages at university, or be they, brought up as Baha'is in Persian or Arab families, that sense of the power of that language is often not as convincing a proof of the manifestation for them as it was for their ancestors, because their ancestors were immersed in that language. They knew the language inside and out. There was no television. There was no radio. There were no distractions like we have to deal with all the time. And the language was very richly composed of Arabic and Persian together. It was a wedded language between two different tongues, one being very much of a Semitic language, and then the other one being Indo-European. The grammar of the two languages are very dissimilar, but those two languages were kind of welded into one. And that is what both the Báb and Baha'u'llah expressed themselves in. And that combination had tremendous influence. I mean, you just think about it. You think about it. Mullah Hussein heard Qayyum al-Asma, the opening chapter of that, and that was it. That's all he had to hear. And actually, both the Bab and Baha'u'llah say this emphatically, is that the proof of the language, the actual revealed language, is such that it should convince the heart of the seeker at the first words that they hear. And like I said, that is something that we know that the early believers experienced. And it's an experience that very few of us have, but we do sometimes. Sometimes you will encounter a seeker who hears just a little bit of Baha'u'llah's writings. It could be just a very small phrase. I've heard of this personally from somebody who heard a phrase from the Seven Valleys, and he was convinced this has to be from God. So this is what this is all about, is the tremendous power of this particular language, the language of the manifestation, and how it transforms us, and how it's, Baha'u'llah sometimes uses the expression, the elixir, the divine elixir. It's magical. Now on 17, this is very, I love this, because here it's like the Bayan is setting up the volunteerism of the Baha'i faith. He's setting it up right here in the Persian Bayan. You guys are required to serve him whom God shall make manifest for 19 days. Doing whatever he says, okay? If you serve him further, that's okay. But this is a requirement. And when you see how Baha'u'llah puts it, which is, all priesthood has been abolished. We don't support anybody to serve the faith anymore. Service to the faith is now all volunteer, and it's from everybody. I like seeing these sort of intimations of what's going to come forth next from Baha'u'llah, and they're all over the Persian Bayan. In 6, Bab 6, we see that the Bab is saying it's very important to venerate his family and to show respect for his family. Baha'u'llah says exactly the same in the Kitabiyat. Very strong wording about how it's important to honor the family. But he says an interesting thing. He says, but the family, my family has no right to any material benefits. They only deserve to be honored and respected. Then we have, let's see, I'm looking through this as quickly as oh yes. I think this is a very interesting thing, that it is in Bab 6 of Vahid 9 that we find God is sufficient unto me. Verily, he is the all-sufficing. This refrain, this sort of, it's kind of like what the Islamic mystics call zikr. It's the repetition of a divinely revealed verse to elevate your soul and bring you closer to God. And here we find the original in Persian of that statement, of that phrase, that has been modified a little bit by Baha'is and set to music of various kinds. And no doubt we'll be treasuring it for, hundreds or thousands of years to come. And in 7, I wanted to point something out. basically at the end of the Kitab Aqdas, Baha'u'llah very emphatically says we must have nothing to do with opium, absolutely nothing. It's interesting that it's at the end of the end of the Persian Bayan that the Báb makes a very strong statement about substances that were being used by Bábís and by Persians in general, and saying these are impure and you must not use them. And I believe that in this translation there are notes about what is tombak and what is asafedita. Are you familiar? Has anybody come across those descriptions so that you know what he's talking about? Is that a no?
I believe so.
Okay, well, in any case, if you will look at this particular Báb 7, you will find notes that explain from reliable sources what these two terms refer to. And they're basically drugs. They're what we call recreational drugs. You see, we have very nice terms for them. We think that they're not so bad. In fact, now I'm in California where it's totally illegal to smoke marijuana anytime you like. But the Báb did not have that attitude towards those kind of substances. He's very critical of their use, and they're absolutely forbidden to Bábís. Now, this is also, we're going to see in 24 a theme that comes up many times in the Baha'i writings. Human beings are not compelled to believe in God. They are not compelled, and we are not to compel them. Baha'is are forbidden ever, even should we become the vast majority of people on the planet, we are forbidden to force people to believe, or, or to force them to say they believe in the manifestation of God or in God himself. This is a free choice that every soul must make for himself and herself. It has to happen internal. And we can teach, we can exhort, we can encourage, but we cannot compel. And but there are consequences also, because we tend to think as Westerners, whether we're European or we're Americans, we tend to think that freedom of choice means it's without consequences. The consequences of either choice or any of the choices we might make are going to be equally beneficial. But that's not what freedom of choice means to the Báb. It means we can freely choose to either follow the manifestation or not follow the manifestation. But then there are consequences attached to both things. And those consequences are not the same. So we have to sort of re-examine our own concepts. It's not like going to a restaurant and choosing to have the steak or the fried chicken. Although for some of us, maybe it is. Maybe there's a similarity because maybe there are consequences for one or the other. But you see my point, is that freedom of choice is that freedom that we had in the Garden of Eden. And that's why the story of Adam keeps being referenced by every manifestation. Because in the Garden of Eden, we were given a choice. You can either obey God or you can go obey the snake. And we obeyed the snake because we thought he seemed like he was a reasonable guy, so why not? I mean, what does our creator know anyway? So, and this is human nature, is to, it's very interesting, because whoever wrote this chapter of Genesis, second chapter of Genesis, understood the psychology of being a child and being a parent, because every parent knows that they say no to their children, and then their children really want to do whatever they said no to. And it's because they said no that they want to do it. And it seems to be part of our human nature. And the only way we really do overcome it is by love. If you love your parents enough, then you won't even think of doing something that would make them upset. But you can try to force your child to do something that's right, but it's never really ultimately going to work. They'll find a way to do it on the sly where you can't see them. Let's go on to 8. I think this is, although it's not all that beautifully translated, I'm sure the Persian is so much more elegant. Everything that is other than love comes from something other than the truth. And everything that is about love comes from the truth. This is a really, really beautiful and profound thought that I think that it's really brilliant that the Báb puts this at the end of his monumental book of laws, and book of not just laws, but of theology. Because it's kind of unexpected. I think it's particularly unexpected for those of us who come from the Western world, because most of us come from a Christian background. And so for us, we're very familiar with the idea of love being of central importance. But we never really, until we read the specific statements by the Báb and Baha'u'llah that put it front and center, we don't know that it really is such. But we hear about so many other things that are important, like justice, for example. But the Báb says, no, this is the most important. And this is the sign. The sign of that something is truthful is that it is connected with love. And the sign of something that is loving is that it's truthful. Very powerful stuff. Now, interesting, in 8, which is just before the end of the Persian Bayan, the Báb now adds opium and booze, alcoholic beverages, and any medicine that has been used in the past that is not necessary. He's very emphatic about this. He endorses natural healing. Abdu'l-Baha did this in quite some detail in a number of his talks and tablets. And Baha'u'llah in the tablet to the physician also speaks about this, about how important it is for us to regulate our bodily integrity, mostly through our diet, and avoiding drugs of any kind, but particularly the opiates and those that contain alcohol. Then we see in 27, he's encouraging association with people who have different beliefs, which of course is, Baha'u'llah not just reiterates that, but he makes that really, in a sense, the focus and foundation of his teachings. That's the principle, organizing principle of the Baha'i revelation is the unity of mankind, is treating all people with love and dignity. And here we see that the Báb is speaking of this in Báb 8. And so let's move on next. Oh, I see there are the notes for Tombak and Asafedida are right there in this document. Some time ago, the Universal House of Justice published a new compilation on prayer and pilgrimage as being the two principal obligations of the believer. And here in Báb 9, the Báb is talking about prayer and pilgrimage. Of course, he talked about them before. And the purpose of prayer for the Bábí is to be prepared to recognize him whom God shall make manifest in his day when he appears. He's gone into quite some detail about the pilgrimage and also prayer, so we don't need to spend much more time with that. So we come to the final Báb of the final Vahid of Persian Bayan. And so let's look at more of 10 so we can see all of 10 if possible. Can we see all of 10? Yes, 10 is only has it has 2 notes because it was very short, very concentrated. Here he's talking about that the spirit of negation, the spirit of denial, of stealing, are what the Bible calls the stiff-neckedness of the Israelites, of them turning towards God with negation. I won't follow you. You come and you reveal yourself to me on Mount Sinai, but I'm going to follow the golden calf when you turn your back. This kind of attitude that so many people have expressed over the course of thousands and thousands of years. And here he's emphasizing that this has happened with every dispensation, and watch out, because what will happen is that in the day of judgment, which is the day of the coming of him whom God shall make manifest, you guys are going to be going through the same. And if you reject him whom God shall make manifest, then all of your professions of love of God and obedience to God mean nothing. Because this is the very test of our sincerity as believers in God, is that we recognize the manifestation. And not just the one that the family likes, or the one that we take a particular fancy to, but all of the manifestations, and especially the most recent. And it's interesting that it says, him whom God shall make manifest is the image of the words Allahu Azam. You know that the name of Abdul Baha, when he was appointed by Baha'u'llah to be his successor, he called him Uzn Yazam. He used the same word. It's a superlative form that of a particular word that indicates the most, the closest to God, the most exalted. But it's the most exalted in a way that we don't really have a word for in English. Because you also in Arabic, you have you have Allahu Akbar. And Akbar means greatest. But Azam means something else. It's beyond great. It has another dimension, infinite dimension, which is why Baha'u'llah could say that one of his sons was Ghuzn-i Akbar, and the other one was Ghuzn-i Azam. You can be great and still fall, but the one who is Azam will never let you down. He's there for you forever. And the Persian Bayan ends with this plea to the believers: purify your souls. Purify your souls. And when you read the hidden words, or you read the seven valleys, this is the beginning. But it's not just the beginning, it's the end. It's what we have to do all the time, is purify our souls. And so interesting that he would conclude his most mighty book of laws and teachings with these words, calling for purification. So this, we have reached the end of the first reading of the Persian Bayan. I'm sure that there are questions. I'm sure that there are comments. We can take as many as you'd like to discuss today. Also, if you want to give this some thought and review and prepare more to say and more to ask about for the next time, we can do that. I want to make you an offer. I want to make you an offer that you seriously consider going back to your community, whether it be the community of Baha'is or a community of friends that you have that could be scattered all over the country, or for that matter, all over the world. It could be one person. It could be 20 people. Could be more. Doesn't matter. But want to invite you to find somebody to share this book with. And because their experience of reading the Baha'i writings is going to be so much richer once they have had the opportunity to read this book from beginning to end. It just opens so many doors, and it resolves so many, it just puts us on the right footing. And, you know, Baha'u'llah actually recommended to the Bábís who recognized him to read the Persian Bayan. And when he finished writing the Kitab-i Aqdas, he was very reluctant to have it published and to have it disseminated widely to the Baha'is, because he wanted to make sure they'd be prepared. And my experience, and I think probably the experience of many or maybe all of you, is that reading this book has made lots of things that you encountered in the writings of Baha'u'llah much more intelligible, much more, oh, I see now how that works, where that comes from, because the two manifestations are, you know, they were called the twin manifestations by Shoghi Effendi, and for good reason, because they came out almost simultaneously. The first comes in 1844. The second becomes manifest for the first time in 1852, 2 years after the first one is martyred. But it's even closer than that, because you read in the Dawnbreakers that Mullah Hussein is sent on a special mission. He says, I've got a mission for you that is completely different from all the other letters of the living. You go to Tehran and you're going to find somebody there who is going to, you need to bring this message to that person. And that was Baha'u'llah. And Baha'u'llah read one opening phrase of Qayyum al-Asma, and he said, this is from God. So the closeness of these two is so extraordinary and is so unique in religious history. But at the same time, it's what God has been telling us for thousands of years. The messengers of God are all messengers of the same God, and they're speaking to us with the same voice of his authority. And we must not get too hung up on the differences that we encounter, because they're not all that important. What's really important is what they have in common. Because that what they have in common, it's just like what we have in common as human beings. That's what unites us. We mustn't get all tripped up about our diversity and have that prevent us from achieving unity amongst human beings. I will send you this in our next session. I want to introduce you to a passage you may not be familiar with in the last work of Baha'u'llah, the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, where he describes the principle of the unity of mankind and the love of all of mankind. And having said that, he says, this is the highest station. And he says, everything I have revealed to the mystic, to those who asked for the law of God, every person I have addressed in my revelation, I have addressed to bring you to the realization of this station, the station of loving all human beings. It's stunning. It's really stunning statement of Baha'u'llah. And it's not, sometimes we use our human language, and our human language how shall I say, it makes common what is not common. The true unity of mankind is not common. It's not an idea that we can simply entertain intellectually. For that to be a reality, it requires that human beings be different from the way we are, because we don't really love everybody. Really loving everybody requires a huge change of heart. And this was understood by previous manifestations, where Jesus told his followers, I have a new commandment for you, and that is that you love one another the way you love me and the way I love you. But see, he didn't tell the Christians, you need to go and love everybody in the world, because they weren't ready for that. And the Quran says the same thing. It calls the believers in Allah and in Islam to love and honor each other. But in this cause, it's something else. In this cause, we're not just to love one another, we're to love everybody. So now I'm going to turn the floor over to all of you. Whoever would like to say something.
I'll go ahead and ask a question that kind of follows up on what you just spoke about. This concept of free will and volition, and the ability to actually implement that need to love all of humanity. Is this because of humanity's development from a biological standpoint, or is it because of humanity's development from a spiritual standpoint, or is it both? Like, why do we not already have that innate capability within us?
We do.
Why do we not do it? Why do we not implement it? Like,
because he gave us choice.
Chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
Does
Right.
one have to come before the other, or what's the reality that the other is already here? We just have to recognize
We've had the potential. We've had the potential. This Abdu'l-Baha talks about this. Baha'u'llah talks about this. We've had the potential always to love God, and then to love all of humanity, all of his creations, because we love God. That's the way that you love all of humanity. You don't love humanity by loving each person. That's really impossible, because then it would mean that we'd have to renegotiate the contract of love with 7 billion people. I don't think so. How are you going to do that? But if you have divine love, if you love God enough, and God tells you to love his creation, and you love his creation for his sake, and you forgive them every evil, every idiocy, every ignorance for his sake, not for their own sake, for his sake, then anything is possible. Anything is possible. And this is what Abdu'l-Baha explained to us in his wonderfully philosophical way. You cannot love humanity unless you love God, because it is from the love of God that you will have the capacity to love humanity.
Well, following up on that specific train of thought, how does one explain the necessity to know and to love God in order to make the reality of the social construction of humanity one? How do we explain that to one another in a way that people would accept or be more willing to investigate for themselves? Like, is there any way that we can explain it, or is it simply like, I've always heard this expression that, in order to be able to communicate with another human being and to be able to have that divine assistance, we have to be plugged into that outlet. All right. So that when we're plugged into that outlet, then it flows through us directly to the other person. Whereas if we're not connected to that outlet, then it's like no energy is going to be getting to the person, period. It doesn't matter what you say, how you say it.
Let me tell you 2 little stories, because I could go off on a long theological explanation, but I think it's more little stories actually sometimes get to the point. So, and they're personal stories. So one personal story is that when I was a brand new Baha'i, they told me, when you teach the faith, you need to say prayers, and you have to ask God's help. And you have to understand, go read your gleanings. Gleanings will tell you in several passages, the angels of heaven are helping you. So I'm a young Baha'i, so I actually believe that. Like, whoa, so the angels are going to help me? Yeah. So it said, sort of get out of the way, don't be afraid, and go and open your mouth and teach the faith. When I was a young tyke in those early years in college, I gave firesides. I had no understanding of what I was saying. In other words, my self-consciousness disappeared, and I couldn't tell you afterwards why I said. But people became Baha'is. I'm serious. There were people who heard me speak and then they became Baha'is either immediately or soon thereafter. And so I know that something was moving through me. I was a channel. You know that wonderful song of Make Me a Hollow Reed? But you become a hollow reed really when you turn to God and you say, okay, you say that this is going to happen, so I'm just going to get out of the way and let it happen. And like I said, I've done that. And I've also tried to give firesides without doing that. Sorry, those weren't very successful. You know, some people got interested in the faith, but nobody became a Baha'i because they didn't feel the spirit. They didn't feel the spirit. And this is that second story I want to tell you is when I met Hand of the Cause Faizi. When I met Faizi, I thought, oh my God, now I know what they're talking about, a spiritually illumined person, because he didn't have to say anything. It was his mere presence that just was so spiritually moving to be around him. And I'm not somebody who's a pushover for this sort of thing. You know, I've been around other hands of the cause that didn't really light my fire. And members of the house and so forth. And they may be spiritually minded people, and maybe I was just receptive at a certain time. But I know the reality of when you encounter somebody who's really spirit filled, it's undeniable. And it changes your relationship with that person. So the answer really to that is we can experience these things only when we experience them in a trusting relationship with God, with Baha'u'llah, by reading his word and actually, okay, so why don't I just set aside my intellectual qualms and believe it, right? And do it, right? And this is, by the way, again, Gleanings is full of wonderful quotations from Baha'u'llah about teaching. And he says, the first thing you must do is become Baha'is. You must live the life. You must live the teachings. Then you can go out and light somebody else's light. You can't do it otherwise. Because they won't feel the spirit. They won't feel that you have to be genuine. You have to be authentic. You don't have to have a master's degree in Baha'i studies. Not at all. And you don't have to have read 100 books or even 5 books. Sometimes, again, I have met people who were very new Baha'is, but they got it. Woo! They really got it. And those were the people in my youth who understood intuitively the most important thing they could do would be to pioneer, travel, teach, and do any kind of teaching possible. And I never got to spend much time with those people. I'd run into them at Greenacre or in Chicago or at a conference, and I'd never see them again because they were out doing it, right? They weren't getting together with other Baha'is and talking about, well, I wonder how it works if we were to do it. They were just doing it. So that's my answer, is that we have to read the writings, read the words of Baha'u'llah and actually believe them. Actually believe them and then do what they ask for. And the thing is, at first, you think, I can't do that. That's scary. What do I know? Who's going to listen to me? They're not listening to you. They're listening to the angels who are speaking through you.
Thanks for that. I mean, it's really, it should be simpler than it is. It is simpler than what I tend to make it out to be. Does anyone else have any questions? Anyone else want to jump in here?
I have a question about the idea of what he just mentioned, this idea of action arising to teach and to serve. And it says in Advent Divine Justice, the references that Sholi Effendi provides he provides us to say we have to be unrestrained as the wind when we teach. And just as in Advent Divine Justice, these quotes about teaching are so very thorough and explicit about teaching, the question I have is, how can you reflect if you don't do something?
Well, sometimes people, it really has a lot to do with the preparation of the soul. There are some souls who because of the burdens that they carry in their lives, it takes them a long time to get around to taking what they would call action, But this is where I think it's so important that we have a loving encouragement of each other. And then again, I would cite my experience of Faizi, because when you were in Faizi's presence, you just felt so embraced, so totally embraced for who you are as a soul. And because of that, your fears just drop away. And Faizi, yes, of course, he was a unique, extraordinary man, but every Baha'i has the potential to become a true believer. And the test of the true believer is, do you live it? Because we can all talk, we all know that, but to live it and show by our lives that we believe it.
And then we reflect on what we're doing so we can improve on what we're doing. But we need to reflect on something that actually is there.
Of sure. Yeah, that's why, there's a hidden word that says, bring thyself to account each day. Right? And what I didn't know at the time, I just discovered this very recently, that is a restatement of a principle that's in the Quran. So the Quran was teaching the same thing. Bring yourself to account every day. This is, if we look back carefully enough in religious history, find this is part of the spiritual path of anybody. Is you have to be conscious of yourself. You have to, and becoming conscious of yourself is a process. Then, I love these stories of, you remember there used to be the blue-haired ladies in the community who would blow everybody away by going pioneering to Angola at age 87. And, I was thinking, well, what did you do the previous 86 years of your life? You weren't an adventuresome person, but you caught the fire. And when you caught the fire, then it was like, there was no saying no anymore. This is where I'm going. I'm going to go teach the faith. I had a really dear friend who knew, he battled leukemia for decades. He was a terrific teacher. He was really the most outstanding teacher in the whole state of Maine. And when I say that, I mean literally almost everybody who became a Baha'i because of his firesides. And His name was Wayne Hoover. And Wayne always said, you know, eventually this leukemia is going to catch up to me. And when it does, I'm going travel teaching. And that's what he did. That's what he did. He didn't go lie around in his bed and feel sorry for himself. You know, he packed his bag and he went to some Caribbean islands and he taught until he died. And to me, that was, I can't think of a better example of how to live your Baha'i life than that one. And that is related to you know, taking yourself to account, because he was doing the best he could do under the circumstances in which he lived. But he knew that when eternity is beckoning, then the game changes. Okay, you no longer have to do the best for your family, for your community, for the people who are, even for your spouse. You have to do the best for God. Your time is running out. So, and you know, this is sometimes people, when they think about, they're single and they're lonely and they wish they had somebody, or they wish they had a family, they have all these regrets, or they're just plain feel an emptiness because there's nobody to share their life with. If they happen to be a Baha'i, I have a message for them. Go pioneering. Go teach the faith, because you won't have time to feel lonely. You will have the angels with you as you go and speak to people. And this business of the angels is, there's nothing to compare with being, you know, an ardent and frequent teacher of the faith. There's nothing to compare with it. And I'll tell you, even my sessions with all of you, I feel taken over. I can maintain my rationality to a degree, but I feel as if there are forces moving in me when I'm talking about the writings of the Bab and sharing them with people and sharing my understanding of them. And that transcends all other experiences. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
So Lucinda, you have like 150 questions for me. Are you waiting for next week?
Well, I did have one question that when you talk about the Bab and Baha'u'llah being a twin manifestation, and that and then at the same time, you know, we've read the Bayan, and these are, as soon as Baha'u'llah came into being, then all of those things were negated, and we are to follow whatever Baha'u'llah says for us to do. And Baha'u'llah did bring forth many of those things. And here and there you've talked about that we're to follow both of them. And could you expound on that idea a little bit more? Just for more clarification or more.
Yes, I want to point you to a text.
Oh, good.
I wanted to point you to a text. It's a text that's found in the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha. It's also cited in the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah by the Guardian. And what it does is it talks about who are the manifestations for this dispensation. And he talks about both the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And this is one of the things that we can also learn if we look at the chronologies of the faith as they're developed and expounded by the Guardian. The Guardian said the beginning of the Baha'i faith is in 1844. Now, he also says the beginning of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah begins later. Okay, but let's not forget, we're talking about two manifestations combined to guide us. And it's not like the Bob is on vacation now, because in the Kitabi, in the Will and Testament, Abdul Baha says the Universal House of Justice and the Guardian are under the protection of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. This is a continuous revelation. The two of them are upholding the two institutions of the faith. And that means really that if they are upholding them, then they're certainly upholding us too. And it makes every bit of sense in the world that we're praying using the prayers of the Bab as well as the prayers of Baha'u'llah. And reading, personally, my personal reading again of the Persian Bayan strengthens my conviction of the inseparability of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, and of the enormous advantages that we have by having two manifestations in our court. This is an enormously powerful time in the evolution of humanity, much more so than we actually are capable of really perceiving it. And as I think we just have to be clear that we never see them in opposition to each other, because they aren't ever. They are totally united with one another. And any differences we see are differences that were required by the conditions of the time. In other words, us. They had to make adjustments for us. And that's enough. That should tell us a lot about how much we're loved by God and by the manifestations, that they'd make adjustments for us.
So Peter, what you're saying is I'm not only missing the signs, I'm missing it twice.
Yes, exactly. And actually, there's a beautiful thing. In one of the prayers for the fast, I think, where Baha'u'llah is praising his followers who recognize the Bab. Whoa, it's just an extraordinary passage. Because you're used to, the Bab praising those of his followers who will recognize him whom God shall make manifest. But here Baha'u'llah is talking about what a blessing it is that they have recognized his predecessor. Yes, humanity has missed out on two manifestations. But whether they're conscious of it or not, the two manifestations are in charge. The world is being guided in a particular direction by these two forces, which are combined. And so when Shoghi Effendi, for example, talked about the greater plan is not like carried out by some sort of forces of nature. No, it's carried out by the forces of the two manifestations. It's just the lesser plan is carried out by us, who actually have the benefit of reading the writings and of being guided by this explicit guidance of the manifestations. But as far as the rest of humanity, they're not really independent. They'd like to believe maybe that they're completely independent. They don't believe in God, or they don't believe in manifestations. They don't believe in religion. It's okay. It's okay. You'll find out sooner or later. And this is one of the reasons why you see in the writing so many statements that we really mustn't get too upset about what's going on around us. It can really look bad. And all of our neighbors and our friends and our families are freaked out, and they just can't, like, how can you believe in God when all of this awful stuff is happening? And Baha'u'llah reassures us that don't worry about it, because all of these disasters are going to lead exactly to where we need to go. Yes, Lucinda, unmute yourself.
I was wondering, I took a class from Sandra Hutchinson, and she recommended you to be someone that was very credible for translating the writings. And I was wondering who, I've tried really hard to find writings of the Bábs, his tablets, other than the Bayan. This has just been wonderful. And I didn't know, is there someone that has, or have you done any work with these so that we can read them, or Baha'u'llah's, or Abdul Baha's?
All right. What I'm going to do for you and for everybody here is I'm going to send you a document which will give you online links to translators and deep thinkers. Some of the really deep thinkers are not translators, but they really help us to understand many of the teachings. Like, for example, if any of you know Jack McCants, Jack, what is his name?
McCants.
No, Jack, no, I don't mean Jack McCants.
Oh, McLean.
McLean. I mean,
Yeah.
Jack McLean. Jack McLean is, he doesn't read Arabic and Persian. He doesn't, most of his work has been in the translations of the writings by the Guardian. But his insights and his correlation, and because he's done a lot of study also of other religions and of poetry, so he knows Rumi, he knows Hafiz, he knows John Donne, he has a wealth of knowledge from his Baha'i experience and of world literature. And the man is just an extraordinary resource. So I can send you, information about people like this.
Thank you.
But as far as translators, we're really fortunate right now, because some of the best translators we've ever seen in the history of the faith. And of course, I'm not comparing anybody to the Guardian. The Guardian was a genius. But the Guardian only translated a relatively small selection of writings of Baha'u'llah, and almost nothing by Abdul Baha. And so we have in our presence right now 2 young men, both of whom have probably spoken on a Clearwater series. Adib Masumian and Joshua Hall. And they're in their 20s, and they're brilliant, and they're deep, and they're impassioned. I sometimes wonder if either of them gets any sleep, because they are constantly posting new essays or new translations, and they're just stunning. And there are scholars who have been praying for the day that this would happen, who have spent years and years and years working on one book and never felt that it was good enough that they could publish it. Khazé Fana Napazir is a good example of that. Spent his whole life working on certain projects. And then he's seeing these young guys who are just like burning, and I've never seen Khazé so excited. Never, because he's seeing the intrepid be as unrestrained as the wind, just like John said. Yes. And they're fearless. And that's, by the way, the whole ending part of the advent of divine justice are one quote after another of Baha'u'llah, encouraging us in Baha'u'llah's words to teach the faith. And it's stunning. It's absolutely goes on for page after page after page. No paragraphs, just one quote after the other, right? I didn't even know it existed because I read the parts of the, I read the parts of the document that were like quoted and that people said were important to talk about and think about, and they are. But when you read the whole letter and you get to those quotes, it's stunning. So anyway, I will send you some information about them, about people who have done translations. There are translations of works by the Báb, by Baha'u'llah, by Abdul Baha.
Oh, good.
There's a lot out there.
Well, it really is helpful to be able to learn a lot about it, learn about the history and everything, but then to go back to that tablet that was written at that time and be able to read the words. That is so helpful.
Peter, before we finish up tonight, we have one question that I'd like Alex to be able to ask. And then could you give us, but before we do that, could you give us a brief synopsis of what we're going to do in the last session next week? And then Alex can ask this question and then we can close out for the evening.
So the last session is really for you. It's for all of you to bring up questions, to bring up comments, I think it's actually going to be important for people who encounter this series of videos online to hear your comments about your experience of reading the book. So next session is really, that's the most important thing that we can do, is that you give your personal experiences. The reading of Baha'i books from beginning to end is a comparative rarity in our community in comparison to, let's say, the Jewish community or Christian community or Muslim community, where it's a communal practice that is engaged in by all believers. And they really regard it as the foundation of their faith. And maybe partly because of our outreach, our emphasis on outreach to other people, is that we may not spend as much time studying the writings as perhaps we should. Because when we do this, the study of the writings is what motivates us to become better people and what motivates us to become better Baha'is. So that's what I think it's really important for people to hear from all of you, because if they hear from all of you that you liked what you did and that it was worth the time and that, it didn't cut that much into your social life, and, you didn't stop watching television, and what you get my point. If they find out that it's not beyond their capacity, they're more likely to do it themselves. They're more likely to say, hey, why don't I give that a try? And, or at least, even if they're not sure about that, then they could go and talk to somebody else and convince them that they should do it. Right. So anyway, your testimonies are going to be very important for people to encounter. So that's number one. Number two is I've been asked about some resources, and I've been asked about some sources of particular statements, and I'm going to provide those to the best of my ability next week, all of them. But it won't take very much for me to do because I'm going to write them down. So then I can share the document, and all of you can take it home.
So it'll be like your notes are, it'll be on the website?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then, but I will go through and explain, what each particular thing is. One of the things I do want to say as far as further reading is that you all did something very heroic. You took on reading a really big fat book. It's sort of like, Das Kapital by Karl Marx, or War and Peace by, by Tolstoy. It's big, it's complicated. It takes a lot of digesting. And so I'm going to trust that when I give you a really long list of things that you can read, that you're not going to be overwhelmed. You've dived into the deep end of the pool and you managed to swim. So, good for you. Good for you. I taught for Wilmette Institute for 10 years. And the last course that I taught was my best. It was the best. I wasn't the best, but they were the best. Okay. And it was on the Sheikhis. It was about Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim. And for some reason, that group of people just took off. They were so excited to read everything. So I kept giving them more and more stuff, right? And then they found other stuff that I didn't cite. And so, this is, personally, I don't think that there's anything more exciting than encountering the spiritual thinking of the higher beings. I just don't think there's anything that compares with it. And it doesn't have any downside as far as I can see. So I'm going to give you lots of things to continue with. And the other thing is that we will talk next time about the possibility of there being a follow-up course on the Kitab-i-Iqan, because, as John read, the Kitab-i-Iqan is the continuation and completion of the Persian Bayan. And if we do it fairly soon, we will still remember the experience we had of the Persian Bayan, and that completion by Baha'u'llah will be that much more rewarding and that much more how shall I put it? Almost ecstatic. Because he doesn't just bring it to a conclusion. He doesn't just complete the Persian Bayan. He takes it into the next dispensation, literally. He blasts into orbit.
Wonderful. It sounds really good. Alex, go ahead and let's get your question, and then I think we'll be able to wrap up.
Okay, this is so in Vahid 9, he mentions this in Báb 1 and in Báb 3 at least, this idea of a room for prayer that has mirrors on the wall has really captivated me. So I don't quite understand it. In Báb 3, he said if a king or sultan becomes a Bábí, that they would build a building and have a room for prayer. I'm not sure if it's that there are a few mirrors or if that the entirety of the walls are covered in mirrors. So what is that? I didn't see any explanation from the Báb as to why to do that. Is there precedent for such a room? What is the symbolism of it? Any thoughts you might have, I'd be interested here. I was talking with my wife about it, and she said, well, you know, a yoga studio would often have mirrors surrounding it, or a dance studio, but why would a room for, why is this significant?
Have you been on pilgrimage?
Yes.
Have you been to the shrine of the Báb?
Yes.
Do you remember the mirrors?
No.
Do you remember? Mirrors and lights. Lights. That's what it's all about. It's the mirrors are mirroring light. It's not us. It's mirroring the lights. So you've got lamps all over the place, and you got mirrors. And the experience of being in a room full of mirrors and lamps. Oh, wow. It's like you just went somewhere else to another galaxy, right? That's really what he's describing here. And when you see the house of the Báb, and you'll see mirrors all over the place. And so all you have to imagine is the lights are on. Or even that the sun is shining through the windows. And so it's that reflected light that you are absorbed in. You are surrounded by light. And it's the physical experience of what's going on inside of you. Inside of you, the word of God and the love of God is penetrating you and affecting your soul. And at the same time, your body is having this experience of light. Or as the Quran says, light upon light.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think all of us should do that. Find some nook or cranny in our houses, put up a whole bunch of mirrors, and then when we're going to go and say our prayers, turn on the light. You know. But again, this is also the aesthetic of the Báb. The aesthetic of the Báb is not darkness. You know, so much of the chadur is black. You know, the priests dress in black. You know, so many of the paintings of apocalyptic figures in Western tradition are black. There's so much black involved. There's no black involved in the Baha'i faith. It's all about light. And there's so many different levels of truth about that reality, of living in the light. It fully, when you think about all of our principles of the equality of men and women, of treating poor people with dignity and respect, and helping them, of you know, reason and science and religion agreeing, it's all light. It's all about light. It's all about the interpenetration of light coming from all angles. Instead of the black and white that we used to know, this was the past. They're the people of the devil, and then they're the people of God, and they're at war all the time, you know? And most of the time, the people of the devil win. And so the people of of God are always suffering. And it's a long, long, long story. And Baha'u'llah changes it all. He says, grow up. You're adults now, all of you. We're going to live in the light. And by the way, all that dark stuff, it was just, you know, it was your own imagination. You thought it was real, but it wasn't.
So on that note, you know, it's been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, Peter. And thank you all who have joined us tonight and stuck with it. And we look forward to your thoughts next week, and starting with not the Igan. We're going to read a little bit from the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. Is that what you?
I'm going to
Okay.
send a passage from the epistle. But I'm also going to send a passage from the Kitab-i Aqdas on the length of the prayers and other writings that we read. And I'm also going to send the passage where Baha'u'llah speaks of the next manifestation of God, and a bibliography.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we look forward to it. Everyone, have a wonderful evening, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Aloha, everyone.